Sway Health.
Hey everyone, I'm John Lynn, the founder of Sway.Health, and we're excited to bring you another in our series of interviews with top leaders in healthcare marketing and PR. And our guest today is Nikki Festa O'Brien. She's CEO at Greenough Communications. Welcome, Nikki.
Thanks so much, John.
Yeah, excited to have you here. And, worked with you many years, gotten a lot of pitches over the years, but excited to have you on the program to be able to share your experiences. But for those that don't know you, tell us a little bit about yourself and Greenough Communications.
Yeah, so Greenough Communications has been around 25 years. I took the helm about 2 years ago, and it's been a really exciting time. The focus and the mission has remained the same. We're a brand marketing and communications agency that's focused on healthcare, life sciences, technology, and the climate transition. So it's really exciting time for all three of those industries.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, and three industries that aren't going to go away. I've always said that about healthcare and technology. It's like, well, the technology will evolve, but healthcare's not leaving us, and technology isn't either. So
Yeah.
it's good to be in that. ViVE and HIMSS are just around the corner. What advice would you give to PR marketing teams on setting yourself up for success at these really big conferences?
Yeah, and I've been to so many HIMSS events back in the day of HIMSS Sanity and all that. And I think for me, it's really about four things: story, timeline, orchestration of news, and becoming the media. So in terms of the story, really thinking through what it is that you want to tell that has value beyond the company that you represent. So, for example, I was talking to somebody who was at CES this week, a reporter, and she said that she received 600 media pitches a day leading up to and through the event, and they were all product pitches. What their product is, what they're looking to push out there for news, and that is just not going to stand out. They're not going to prioritize that meeting to really stand out. It really is about determining what's the trend, and it's not AI. Just hint,
AI is
big,
not the trend.
that is not the
That's
trend.
interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, that's table stakes now.
Okay.
What's the data? What's the customer? And what's the impact? And without those, you're not going to be able to stand out from a PR perspective. So really finding and taking the time to work that out in advance. And that brings me right to timeline, which the deadline isn't when the event starts. The deadline's about 2 months prior to determine that story. Without knowing that, having the assets created, having, whatever news you plan to announce ready and prepared, you're going to miss the reporter's window to book those meetings. So you really want to make sure that you have that timeline ready to go. And
So are
then
you suggesting 2 months is when you start pitching the reporter, or 2 months is when you get the story ready, or
story has to be ready so we can pitch the reporters.
about 2 months out?
About two
Gotcha.
months out, yeah. And you'll get a couple. I'm not looking at that yet. I'm at JPM
Sure.
and in all of that. Because we are entering that healthcare trifecta timeframe right after the holiday every year of JPM, ViVE, and HIMSS. But having that story set and ready to go, I always say that's the Christmas gift that you give to yourself, a holiday gift that you give to
Mm.
yourself, is get that story solidified, ready to go, assets created, come back from your holiday break, and you hit the ground running. And it's good to, whether you're going to JPM or not, have the conversations with the media there and see what they're thinking about, because the trends coming out of JPM is going to really fuel the trends that go into ViVE and then HIMSS. So you want to make sure that you're aligned there, that you have your story straight, but then you're also able to pivot and incorporate into the stories that are coming out of there and the trends coming out of that event. And you're continuing that conversation with them and following them.
Mm.
My team did an awesome audit of the media in November, of all the media that goes to all three of those events. And
Okay.
what we're hearing is that they're choosing between ViVE and HIMSS, right? They're not able to go to both for the most part. So also starting those conversations early allows you to capture them even if they're not going to the event, or if they're only going to one of those events, you're on their radar right away.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess I'm the unique one. I'm going to both. But I was going to ask you, how do you approach it? Like, I think companies are starting to do the same thing, which is really interesting, where they're like, oh, I'm either going to go to ViVE or I'm going to go to HIMSS, depending on what they're trying to sell, but if they're going to both, how do you prioritize that too? I mean, I think that's pretty interesting because they're essentially in the same time frame and you're hitting up some of the same reporters. Sounds like, according to your data, maybe not all the same. I'm the
Yeah.
exception, but
Yeah.
so is it based on, I guess, the one, if they're going to both, how do you prioritize that? That's interesting.
Yeah, I think it depends on where your customers are, or your prospects are.
Mm.
I think we're seeing a bit of a different attendance, at both shows, and then some repeat attendance too. So if you're not able to catch something at one, you have the opportunity, you have a second bite of that apple. But they're also in two totally different locations, and I think that's such an important piece. So last year, HIMSS was in Orlando, and they're often in Orlando, as they are often in Vegas, and they're often
Yeah.
in Chicago, right? I've been
Yeah.
to all of those locations, and location does matter.
Mm.
So I find that in Orlando, for example, the approach is to really get people to that booth, have some interactivity at the booth. There's no really else to go. So you
That's
have
so
their full
true.
attention, right? And you're able to book meetings back to back, having some place to sit and have a conversation. That's always been really important in Orlando. Vegas, which is where it is this year, there's less time to meet.
Yeah.
Surely distance and distractions are the other reason for that. And you want to be where everybody else wants to be. And it's not the
Mhm.
show floor in Vegas. They want to be at the underground clubs and the VIP rooms and all the sort of swanky areas that are there. So think about maybe doing an event at HIMSS, and maybe ViVE is where you do more of your traditional booth, because HIMSS is in Vegas this year. I might switch those next year if they're in different locations. For example, if they revisit Orlando or Chicago, maybe it's back to booth for HIMSS and it's an event at ViVE. So that's how I would determine some of that. And I always advise our clients to just think about the approach a little differently depending on the location of where it
Yeah.
is.
No, you're 100% right. There's nothing other than Point Orlando in Orlando. And even that's a
Yeah.
little, it's fine for the evening events, right? But
Yeah.
they don't go there during the day. That's for sure.
Right.
There's nowhere to go. Super interesting. When do you think it does make sense for companies to go to these big events like ViVE and HIMSS? And when should they maybe sit it out and not go to them?
So I think everybody should go to the events from an attendee perspective, because I think it's really impossible to understand the intricacies of having success at these events
Hmm.
without having experienced them. And things like location matters, and you wouldn't realize that. You just say, oh, it's just another convention center in another location. What does it matter? But then you go and you realize it is different. So I do think that attending is always important. The networking's great, the content's great, the experience sets you up for the future. But I think overall, my advice is to stay small until you can go big.
Mm, okay.
Because if
That's
you have a
interesting.
table in the Venetian, like that's really not going to do it for you. So I would think about balancing, what are you looking to get out of the event? Is it relationship building? Is it prospect customer meetings? Is it to be there because your customers are there and have that presence? Investors, there's a lot of really great investor-led sessions happening at both ViVE and HIMSS, that are super great. And I don't think you need necessarily a presence or to exhibit when you have those moments, and that's what you're trying to get out of it. But when you're balancing that ROI and your presence there, keep it focused. And unless you can do those huge booths with multi rooms and things like that, I don't think you really need to go that big.
Yeah, I mean, to your point, a lot of times there's the focused areas, whether it's a security one or the AI one that they're doing at HIMSS this year or the interop
Yeah.
one, those are just as valuable, I think, a little stand there versus a 10 by 10, which costs a lot more, or 20 by 20, which, kind of gets in the middle. So I like that. Stay small until you can go large. Interesting. How do you work with, the companies you work with? How do you evaluate kind of the ROI from conferences? I think it's interesting, over the years talking to so many, there's so many ways to look at the ROI from conferences. How do you kind of approach that?
Yeah, so I'll tell you a story of a client I had. They were in the mid-market, and they had probably my favorite approach
Okay.
to these events, and it'll kind of also articulate the ROI pieces to it. It was when HIMSS was in Chicago, actually, and kind of similar to Orlando, you're stuck in the convention center in Chicago,
Yeah,
but then
that's
everyone
true.
has right, and then everyone has their events on Magnificent Mile after,
Yep,
right? And a lot of them
exactly.
are late evening events. They go late, they have fun, a lot of architectural cruises and things like that happening. And what they did is they cornered that time period just after the event was ending, or towards the end of that last session,
Hmm.
and before the evening events, the big evening events. And what they did is they had transportation at the event. So if you stayed right to the end, it brought you to the restaurant. And they
Hmm.
had another transportation pickup by the hotels everyone was staying at to bring you to the
Okay.
restaurant. So it made like nobody could miss it, right? Everyone showed up on time. We had planned a huge research report with, new data that supported what they're doing, their vision. And they invited handful of customers, handful of prospects. We invited a few good media folks there, from different varieties, right?
Hmm.
Podcasts, someone from the trade, someone from business press, someone that we actually brought from the Boston area, which
Okay.
is where the client was based, and then a few analysts as well. And we had class there. So we had this
Okay.
like really great intimate event. We talked about the research report findings. We were announcing it the next morning, but they were all getting that first look. And it was really great conversation. We had a couple seats where we had the executive team there, and then we had like some extended folks that would come. But the
Just for
idea,
that.
right? But the idea is that the sales team live on the floor was like, you know what? Do you have plans after this? Come to our event, right? So it also gave great in-person prospecting and sort of
Mm.
real-time delivery of that, because a lot of those events, they're sold out, tickets, seats are filled, but we intentionally left some open. And it was just a really great way. They had a very small presence at HIMSS. Again, stay small till you can go big. But this is where they spent their money. And I would say that the ROI was a win-win-win. The customers had a great time, great conversations. They enjoyed talking to the prospects that we brought to the table. We had, chief medical officers, really great representation there from both sides to have those conversations. We got amazing media coverage because they got access to that report, access to these great conversations that were happening. And then the analysts had all of their, customer interviews that they had to do for their next report, that all of the boxes were ticked for them too, because instead of waiting and sort of back and forth scheduling of them, they were able to do it right there at the event. And we can say, oh, we submitted everything we needed to for your quadrant, or whatever that is that they're working on. So I like articulating ROI through an example like that, because I think that was one that was done really well. They set out to say, we want it all, because unfortunately, that is always the answer. What do you want to get out of this event? Everything. So that, I think, did that.
Yeah, that is interesting. I mean, you highlight all the ROI areas, right? Your
Mhm.
existing customers, your prospects, the media analysts, like all of those are potential ROI at a conference. So that is an interesting way to approach it. And you bring up a really interesting choice that I hear from a lot of people. It's like, should I do a talk, and do kind of a formal presentation in my evening event? or should it just be a party and nobody wants to go to another presentation at the end of the day? And
Yeah.
it sounds like you kind of fitted in that middle section in between
Yeah.
to kind of justify that. Is that how you kind of played it? But if it would have been later, you were like, no, we just need a party, or
It'd just be a party. Well, it was just it was a full dinner. We didn't do a formal presentation.
oh, okay.
The CEO did stand up and say, "Hey, we have this going on. We're gonna, leave you with this
Gotcha.
information and whatnot." But the idea of this is to really just have a great time, eat dinner, and have good conversation. And it really went well.
That's awesome. And the dinners are always an interesting conversation as well. My challenge is and we had this actually at Sway Health Live this year. A CIO stood up and he said, "Don't hold me captive for 3 hours at your dinner." He's
Right?
like, "I can do an hour. You give me
Yep.
an hour a dinner, that's fine. But if you're doing
Yep.
dinner that's 3 hours, you're gonna lose me, and I'm never gonna do business with you." I was like, "Wow," he put it straight, right? Which we
Yeah.
understand that reality. We've all been at those dinners, and there's certain conferences where that makes sense, but I think at the
Yeah.
large ones where there's so much going on, you
It's too
can't do
much.
it.
Yeah, no, it was very mobile, high top, like sort of
Yeah,
food networking. And we told them we're gonna let you out in enough time to get ready for, whatever else you have going on that evening. So we tried to make it as easy as possible.
that's awesome. Well, let's shift gears from conferences a little bit. I want to talk about some internal, efforts that you have, and I know a lot of people struggle with this and in getting their team engaged. What do you think are some of the keys to driving internal engagement for a healthcare company to be involved in their marketing and PR efforts?
Yeah, it's the same for any company, right? It's right now it's engagement. There's a horrifying stat that continues to permeate every channel I'm on of, I think it's a Gallup poll that 21% of the workforce is engaged. Um,
Wow.
yeah, and I hate this stat, and they're doing it every quarter. We've gone up from 18, we've gone back down to 19, but I also just feel like, all right, media, calm down. Let's go with positivity here.
Mhm.
And I think one of the things that, especially in healthcare, it's an easy get for meaning, right? What you're doing innately has purpose. And a lot of the reason why that Gallup poll stat is there when I read the report every quarter is that employees feel like they don't understand why they're doing what they're doing. What's their
Mm.
why, right? That's always the question. And in healthcare, it's saving lives. Like
Yeah, should
it's
be
right
easy.
there. Yeah. Yeah, the answer's right there. But I do think in general that engagement score is something actually at Greenough we're trying really hard to rewrite the narrative on, right? We're
Okay.
in media. Let's not fall victim to what we know is happening here. They're sort of preying on that negativity. And rather than the great disengagement or resentment or resignation and all of those things, what if we did the great engagement, right? Because I
Hmm.
really strongly believe that positivity breeds positivity. Don't push information to the team, push meaning, right?
Hmm.
What is it that's going to connect with them? Do your employee pulse surveys, do your customer pulse surveys, take that data, draw the parallels, and have that be what really sets the foundation of how and when you communicate with the team, and bring them into that and make it count, make it relevant, make it easy to read. We subscribe to Smart Brevity here at Greenough, and then find your ambassadors and make them champions. And having that formula is not only repeatable, it's unattainable. It's the winning holy grail.
Yeah. Smart brevity. I've never heard that. That's I like that. That's
Yeah.
really interesting. And you're right. I mean, that's the challenge. Yeah, I describe it this way that as I walk down the aisles of a conference and I connect with different people at different companies, I have to remember sometimes those people are just doing a job.
Right.
They're just trying to get to the drinks later. And they
Yeah.
don't have the passion, which is sad, which is probably why they're not
Yeah.
engaged in their company because they
Yep.
haven't been given the mission and helped understand because to be frank, a lot of CEOs treat them as cogs in the wheel versus
Yeah.
an important part of the mission of what they're trying to accomplish. So yeah, that's really interesting. how do you, go about connecting kind of internal communications with their overall, comm strategy? I think that's the other challenge sometimes. The best illustration for me actually is from conferences when I see a salesperson and they're like, "Oh, you're from the press. Oh, okay, see you."
Yeah,
And I'm like, wait a minute. Like, I'm literally here talking to you, and salespeople are a unique beast, right?
yeah,
That if you're not in their area, et cetera, right? Yeah, we've all
yeah,
seen. But like,
yeah.
that feels like a disconnect. So how do you work to kind of connect internal comms with overall comms in an organization?
What's funny is earlier when I was saying sort of the story timeline orchestration and becoming the media, that last one is the connection point.
Mm,
So one of the things that's so critical at these events, at your company, being a part of the team is becoming a resource in all areas.
mm,
So you know that your team is on social media. They're already there. So don't forget LinkedIn as a way to communicate something. No matter how well it was written in an email or how many places you have it saved on some sort of internal, external drive, or all of those different things, how easily accessible it is, how many times you've had a town hall. If you just post an external ready version of whatever information you want the team to subscribe to, hear, understand, get excited about, etc., on social, right? On your LinkedIn, just post
mhm.
it there. They will see it and they will see it differently because they're going there for something else, right? They show up at work for something and then they go to
Okay.
social media for something else.
Uh-huh.
And that's the way to sort of blur those two worlds together and really connect on a deeper level. And also it gets them excited because now they can comment on it and they can be a part of the story. And winner of all winners, they repost it because
Mhm.
they're so subscribed, and then you're commenting on them and you're giving them their shout out and their shine, right? So I think that can be the strongest internal communications channel is LinkedIn, and it's actually an external communications channel. So that connector. And then I also think that if it's important internally, it's probably important externally.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I just have running through my head a document on a SharePoint isn't an internal communications, an effective internal communications channel. That's
Right.
we don't necessarily get there or Slack or whatever you might be
Yeah.
using. Yeah, well, and I think also if you do it the right way, I think we see a lot of companies embracing what you just described, especially CEOs that are
Mhm.
pushing forward a vision. We see more of them, not all of them, that's for sure, but we see
Yeah.
some exemplars. And what's interesting is you often will get customers commenting, which is valuable to
Yes.
your team as well to
Yes.
see, oh, wait, oh, the customer resonated with that message. So maybe I need to incorporate that into what I do as well. So that's really interesting.
Absolutely. And then going back to sales, right? Because I mean, ultimately, you asked about ROI of these events. It's leads. Like, spoiler, it's leads. It's always leads. And on LinkedIn, people will go out there and say, "Hey, I'm looking for a great agency, specializes in healthcare, specializes in technology, whatever." And the best thing you can do is be engaged up to that point, because in that moment, that's where your customers and your clients and whatnot shine. So that just happened to us recently, and 4 of our clients responded to that post saying, "Hey, check out Greenough." And that was
Wow.
a big moment for us. But there's a learning in that moment, right? We're all really active on LinkedIn. We're all excited about it. It is our actual communication strategy. Is talk about it internally, post it externally, get excited about it. Make sure that our clients see that we appreciate them and that we're promoting everything that they have going on, and then they promote it back. That's not just a communications agency strategy, that's a company communication
Yeah.
strategy.
Yeah, and it's part of the culture, right?
Yeah,
Culture creation and culture that
yeah,
you create that
yeah,
yeah, it's
a great
powerful.
engagement.
Obviously we're very active, so we appreciate that as well.
Yeah.
And you see it, right?
Yeah,
And you
for
don't
sure.
often see it in the numbers until you get to a conference. And then they're like, oh, John, when you posted that, you're like,
Yeah.
oh, uh, so you were reading, you were watching.
Is this where we do the sway health together?
Well, I mean, there's that as well, right? You know, definitely people hear it, right? And they remember,
Yeah,
especially if you do it. You know, when we started with blogging, right? You know, forever ago as blogs, and I
sure.
always would tell people it's more about having a consistent effort, you know, that they see over time, so that they hear the message over time. I think the same is true whether it's LinkedIn, whether it's podcasts, whatever format you decide to
Yeah.
use. It's that consistency over time that
Mhm.
people will remember. You know, unless you know, your name is Glockenflecken and you're really funny. Okay, well then you can just do humor and that works fine too. But turns
Sure.
out that's really hard to do.
Yeah. And good
But
luck striking the right tone.
yeah, exactly. So consistency is something we can all do. You know,
For sure.
we don't have to have special talents necessarily. So that's, I think, powerful.
Yeah.
Um, you know, there's a controversial topic that you know, always comes up in the Sway Health community, and that's, should marketing report to communications? Should communications report to marketing? You know, it's a similar question. Like, is marketing communications? Is communications marketing? You know, like, how do you see it, and why do you see, you know, whether marketing should report to communications or communications to marketing?
I know it's so funny. You make one bold statement. A couple of years ago, I said that on a podcast, and I get asked this question now every single time
Okay.
I talk to anyone, and people get excited about the topic because whether they agree or disagree,
Mm-hmm.
one way or the other, everyone feels really passionate about it, which is great.
Mm-hmm.
Because we're in this together. And I know when I did make the statement that communications should be the lead and marketing should report into them as
Mm-hmm.
another channel. Um, I do believe that ultimately. However, that is not to devalue marketing in any way. I think
Mm.
marketing has changed. You know, their metrics have changed, the channels have changed, and who owns certain things have changed. The
Mm.
growing need for communications um, has, and channels and conversations has elevated communications to a discipline that's needed across the board. I was reading a stat the other day that there's 400,000 chief communications officer titles on LinkedIn right now.
Wow.
That's fantastic. I remember not knowing one not that
Really?
long ago.
Wow.
Right. And I've been in communications over 20 years and I never knew a chief communications officer. Now I know many, right? And that's excellent. It shows progress in that field, but it also shows a need, right? Because something does not exist unless you need it. And the other thing is, and this was my favorite stat of all time, I think McKinsey put it out that 85% of the CEO's job is communicating.
Interesting.
And
Hmm.
And now that I sit in that seat, I agree. I always knew it, but I 100% agree now. And but only like what? I think the same report had like 2% of CEOs have marketing experience, or 10% of CEOs have marketing experience, right? So, and they're intrinsically linked in that way. So I
And
think
90% think they can do marketing.
oh, no, yeah. Yeah, they all have an opinion about it. And bring them to us, but also like know whose like discipline it is ultimately. But I
Yep.
think when I said that statement, when I hear that conversation, what I really hear and what I know I was seeing was that communications needs a seat at the table.
Hmm. Yeah, and I think that's where I would come at it is,
Mhm.
it's more about making sure that communications and marketing are aligned is probably the key goal, you know, and what aligns them better. Marketing being
Mhm.
in charge of them and saying communications isn't worth anything, or
Yeah,
communications being in charge of saying, yeah, both of us are valued,
yeah.
you know, and we need to align it. That's interesting. It's interesting what you say about, you know, kind of connecting with other communication, you know, chief
Mhm.
communications officers.
Yeah.
You know, ironically, that's, you know, when Sway Health the conference first began, that was one of the biggest things. We're like, you stood across from each other for 3 days at HIMSS, but never talked. You never knew each other. And
Yeah.
that's what they found at the conference was like, yeah, we finally get to hear each other. And,
Yeah.
sometimes it's help, sometimes it's give resources, sometimes it's share ideas, and
Sure.
sometimes it's commiserate that this is hard. So,
Yeah.
yeah,
Right.
but you're right. The power of communications is key, and that,
Yeah.
some do it more effectively than others.
And communications, just one last point on that, because
Yeah,
I
yeah.
am passionate about it, is communications gets information first,
Hmm.
because the information can't go anywhere without involving communications. So I do think the orchestrating power of that, just by virtue of having all of the information that other executives may never see or hear, other departments, they get the employee, they get the executive, they get the CEO, the board,
Hmm.
um, the customers, the prospects. They have their hands in all of that, and they also receive that information, and then have to connect the dots through that and create the message. So I I really think it's actually brand. It's
Hmm.
so that's why we're brand marketing and communications at Greenough, because it's really representing that brand. Communications is a vehicle for that, and the marketing is a channel for it to live on. So, some semblance of that. I'm still working out that full diagram, but that would be my prediction of how that's all going to end up shaping out.
Yeah. I mean, I would just add the caveat of good communications people,
Mm.
that are allowed to do their job. The challenge I see over and over is that so many are given so many tasks, if you will.
Yeah,
And so they're
it's a
so
catch-all.
distracted by the operational minutia of tasks that they
Hmm.
never get to what you just described, which is
Yeah,
hearing the voice of the customer and the voice of the
sure.
board. They're not even invited to go to the conference to be able to
Yeah.
hear those things, to be able to do their job more effectively because, they're not driving leads or, whatever. So, yeah, I mean, I think that's the challenge too.
And something that would help with those tasks is putting them at the table from the beginning.
Yeah.
So when we talk about the orchestration of news, right? This linking your first question to this question together. When you're preparing for ViVE or HIMSS, um, everyone thinks the deadline again is the event,
Hmm.
right? So if communications is at the table, it would say, okay, well, we actually want to put out in a best practice scenario our product news the week before the conference,
Hmm.
so that the week of the conference, we have a customer story. And we're able to have that be the follow-on to the media we met with the week before. So in order for us to have it the week before, the work back timeline's actually this, right? And the reason
Hmm.
why we get all the tasks at the end is that they either don't listen or we're not involved. So they don't do those best practices. They don't do that. And it becomes a rolling thunder, and you throw it all together and you've got 36 hours to make it all happen. And that means you have to fix everything from transportation to timelines to, accompanying the executive to where they need to be and finding a spot to have the meeting that doesn't exist. All of those things end up on your plate.
Yeah, and to be fair, I mean, some of the challenges, and I think every publication's different, but I look at
Yeah,
our timeline, and this is a bit of the shift of the media industry as well, which is a
sure.
topic probably for another day. But, we do all of our paid scheduling first and prioritize them. And then
Yeah.
about 2 weeks out is when we finally do our editorial and fill the holes with editorial.
Yeah.
And so, it is what it is. That's how the business
Hmm.
model works, with the sponsored and giving priority to the sponsored
Yep.
coverage, which is why I guess so many people are going towards sponsored as well, along with other things.
Hmm.
Fun fact, I think our sponsored coverage gets twice as much as our editorial, which is fascinating.
In
Uh, you
terms of
know,
engagement.
well, because we promote it twice
Yeah,
as
right.
much, three times as
Right.
much, right? Like,
Yeah,
so,
okay.
it's interesting, from that perspective. Anyway, the topic for another day, but it
Shameless
does.
plug, go off.
No, but I mean, I think what's interesting is that, like, you know, those timelines have changed because of the
Sure.
sponsored
For
priority,
sure.
you know, which puts you in a hard position when you're working for editorial because,
Yeah.
hey, I am waiting until 2 weeks out to kind of fill it in. And then,
Right.
you know, of course, it's the mad dash
Yeah.
scramble to fill in
Yeah.
whatever holes you can.
And
So,
nobody wants to hear that. Nobody wants to hear, hey, it might be that we don't know until they're getting on the plane
yeah.
if they're going to meet with you because they had important slots they needed to fill in advance.
Yeah, well, and to your point though, you know, at least for me, I do go back to the person who pitched me very first 2 months ago, and I
Mhm.
reply to them first, you know. So if you're the one pitching the week before, you know, and I'm going through my 400, 500 pitches for hymns, you know, as I go through,
Yeah.
well, guess what? By the time I get to 400, my no meter is really high.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I like to give credit to the people who pitched early and, you
Yeah.
know, they get it early and maybe where I'm a little less likely to say no. So anyway, as we wrap up, what other trends do you see happening in 2025 that healthcare organizations should be embracing? It's funny you say AI is not a trend. I'd love to hear what are the trends that we should be embracing?
Well, I guess that was slightly off. So it's AI is the table stakes. We're
Ah,
going to
got
see
you.
much more in AGI, right?
Oh,
Artificial
okay.
general intelligence, the reasoning engines. We've moved beyond just usage of AI, and now we need to have meaning behind the AI.
Mm,
The real true automation is going to be happening on those sort of repeatable tasks, and now we're going to be able to really focus in, or we should all be ready to focus in on thinking bigger, right? So if you have a 5-hour task that can happen in 5 minutes now, what else should you be spending your time on? And I think
mm.
that should be the personalization, true personalization. I've been talking about personalization for over 20 years. We all have, right? But now you'll have the time to do it.
Ah, I like that. Yeah, that's really interesting. So you know, the AI is going to allow us to understand the problem area quicker so that then we can personalize it to whatever if we're pitching or the customer. I
Mhm.
love that.
Mhm.
Nikki, this was really interesting. A lot of
Yeah.
fun. I love
Yeah,
learning from
same.
you. And
Yeah.
I'm interested to see what Sway Health thinks. Obviously,
Yeah.
let us know in the comments. Let us know on social media.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm sure Nikki and I would love to hear your thoughts as well. But I appreciate you taking time to talk with us. And thanks everyone for watching and listening. If you want to find more great healthcare marketing content like this, be sure to check it out at sway.health. Thanks, Nikki.
Bye. Thanks.